Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games. Today we're continuing my top 100 board games of all time, and in particular today we're crossing over into the top 50 board games of all time. So we're talking about some really good board games. Today we're going to be sharing numbers 50 through 41. So without any further ado, let's get straight to the list with my number 50. And my number 50 board game of all time actually wasn't on the list last year. It's not a new game to me. I've been playing this game for several years, but for whatever reason, I ranked it at 137 last year. And revisiting that list, I do not know why. I guess maybe some of the people I was playing it with had grown cold on the game, and that had affected how I felt about it. But let's not belabor the point. Let's get straight to my number 50 here. And that's Dice Town by Bruno Cathala and Ludovic Leblanc. And this is a fast-paced Wild West themed game. The title says it all. It's a dice game, kind of like Yahtzee in a way, but the dice are actually poker themed. So you got an ace, and you got a king and a queen and a jack and a 10 of hearts and a 9 of spades. And you're trying to roll for the best poker hands to win different favors in the different buildings across town. And it has a really cool, neat roll and re-roll system with some money that's used not only to accumulate points, but it's also used as a dice mitigation mechanism where you can choose to keep additional dice that you roll, or you can use money to pay and get additional re-rolls. Really cool game thematically. I feel the Wild West expansion has a lot to do with why I am enjoying this game, and it still ranks really high on my list, because not only does the Wild West expansion add the capacity for a 6th player, but it adds additional features for each of the different buildings, each of the different parts of town, so that in each of those buildings there could be potentially 2 different benefactors as opposed to just one, which is what the base game had. So it made it feel tighter. It's a much more generous experience, which I wouldn't recommend for a smaller player count, 2 or 3 players. But when you're playing 4, definitely at 5 or 6, you can really stand to gain from all those additional options, and knowing that you can risk trying to pursue being the best in one of those particular buildings, because even if you fall short and you're not number 1, you'll at least be number 2 and you'll get a consolation prize. My number 50 board game of all time, Dice Town. And now we move on to my number 49, and my number 49 is a new game to the list. As a matter of fact, this section of 10 games doesn't have as many new games as some of the other sections on this top 100. But this game is new to my list, and that is Dragonfire. And this game here, it's a deck building game with a Dungeons and Dragons theme, a D&D theme. And this is actually a spin-off of the original Shadowrun Crossfire, which had come out years prior to this. And that's also based on an RPG, science fiction, dystopian type universe. And this here, Dragonfire, along with Shadowrun Crossfire, are notorious for being difficult games. And they are. And one of the reasons why they're difficult is because this game, the model of this game, recommends or urges players to have repeated play, because what happens is, as players go on these different quests that quite often they fall short and fail at, they're earning experience points, and with these experience points they're buying additional skills for their characters in order to level them up, and therefore they will have more powerful characters, and when they go on those repeated quests they will have a better chance of accomplishing it. Of course, the game comes with additional quests so that you could rev up the difficulty in correspondence with the characters getting more powerful and stronger. So that part is really cool, and it's very reminiscent of the RPG kind of model. Now, one of the things I like about this as an RPG, not as an RPG, as a deck building game, is the fact that it's very unique from that perspective. First of all, it's a cooperative game, and I feel that the cooperation is so tangible, it's so palpable. Some cooperation games or cooperative games are cooperative in name only, the fact that players theoretically have a common objective. However, in Dragonfire, what really makes it feel cooperative is the fact that in so many practical ways you can help your teammates around the table. You can go to whatever location they might be found in. You can take one of their monsters that they're encountering and fight them for them. You can play particular cards that have the assist keyword on their turn or on your turn in order to help someone else out in their battle. So many really, really cool things that can happen from a cooperative perspective. I also like, from a deck building mechanism perspective, I like the fact that the cards that you purchase from the market, they're readily available for you right then and right there. There's not too many. There's a few others deck building games that do that, but usually the model is you buy something from the market, you place it in your discard pile, and you don't get it until you shuffle your deck and eventually draw it. In this case, you're being very tactical and you're buying the cards that are most beneficial to you right then and right there. Really like it. My number 49 board game, new to the list this year, Dragonfire. Now we move on to my number 48, and my number 48, again, not new as the majority of the games on this section of 10 will be. This game was ranked on my list at number 75 last year, and it's bumped up all the way to 48, and that is Elder Sign. And this game here by Richard Launius and Kevin Wilson and Fantasy Flight Games is one of the older games in the Fantasy Flight Arkham Horror file line of games. And this game basically has been referred to as Cthulhu meets Yahtzee because there's a lot of dice rolling, but it's not that simple. There is a very complex roll and lock mechanism that takes place each turn where players have to roll a die and they either have to use one of the dice that they just rolled or one or more of the dice they just rolled, or they have to forfeit one of the dice. If none of the dice that they rolled are beneficial to them, they're going to have to forfeit one die and roll one fewer die for the next roll. And basically what you're trying to accomplish is you're trying to meet certain tasks on particular adventure cards that you find on the table. And there's always 6 particular adventure cards on the table at a given time that players can go to and try to accomplish. And you have all these different tasks which are comprised of different faces of the die. Now, some adventures are a little bit easier because you can meet the different tasks in whatever order you please. However, others are a little bit more challenging because they have a particular order in which you have to fulfill these tasks, and it makes it much harder to accomplish. You also have these terror effects on some cards that every time you fail to meet a task and happen to roll a particular symbol with the tentacles on it, that triggers a terror effect on the card, and it's usually something very detrimental for the players or the player because this game is a cooperative game that can be played solo, and as a matter of fact, that is mostly how I play the game, solo. And it's one of the reasons why it's climbing on the list. My appreciation for solo games has grown over the last 12 months or so, and games that I can play solo are being benefited as to where they rank on this list because of that appreciation. This game, not very thematic from a mechanical perspective, but the flavor text on all the different cards really immerses you. I like the fact that there is lots of ways of mitigating the dice rolling through the use of the common, unique items and the allies and spell cards. All these different ways of accomplishing these things. I haven't even tried the expansions yet, and I'm sure that as I explore the expansions, this game is going to continue, maybe not to rise on my list, but at least hold steady somewhere in the middle of the pack. My number 48 board game of all time, Elder Sign. And now we move on to my number 47. This is another Fantasy Flight game, and this is another game that was on my list last year and climbed up. This game was ranked number 61 last year. Now it's number 47, and that is Descent, 2nd edition. And with all the buzz about Descent 3rd edition, I don't want to go on a tangent as to why that game is not on my list and why I haven't even played it. I'm not a big fan of the graphic design of that game. I wasn't a big fan of the app integration model. I'm not a huge fan of that in board games, but I was willing to bypass that. But their choice in graphic design was just was not to my liking, and I decided to move on as far as purchasing that. But I'm still enjoying this classic here, Descent 2nd edition. And I think one of the reasons why it climbed on my list is the fact that I found ways to play this game solo. While there is an app, the Road to Legend app, that allows players to play solo in different scenarios, and that app is just fine. But at the same time, I have so much content for this game that I want to use that does not get used through that app. So I just found a way, some house-made rules to play this game solo. It's a little bit high maintenance. I do have to factor in lots of decisions that the Overlord would make. But I'm enjoying playing it this way. I'm enjoying controlling a group of heroes. And usually I just play with 2 heroes, so I'm controlling 2 heroes at a time. And going through all the different quests to accomplish all the different campaigns. I'm enjoying that experience from this game. As a matter of fact, previously I've only played this game as the Overlord, so this new solo mode that I'm playing allows me to enjoy the game from the other perspective, and that's definitely why it's growing. Classic dungeon crawl style game, my number 47 board game of all time, Descent. Journeys in the Dark, 2nd edition. Now we move on to my number 46 board game of all time, and that is another game that climbed on the list, not quite as a big box as Descent over here. This game was ranked number 76 last year, and now it's 46, so we're talking about 30 spots, and that is Port Royal. And Port Royal is a light card-based game designed by Alexander Pfister, and it's a press your luck game. It's a nautical pirate themed game where players are trying to basically raid different merchant ships for their gold and use those gold to accrue or recruit different character cards. And those character cards are your victory points at the end of the game. And whoever scores 12 points first is the winner. But it's interesting because you're trying to raid these merchant ships and you're simulating that by drawing cards from the deck. And there's 4 different or 5 different colored banners on the different ship cards. And if you ever flip a ship that comes from the same nation or has the same colored banner as a ship that's already in the tableau, then you bust. So that's something you want to consider every time you make the decision of flipping over the next card. Now, there are lots of ways of mitigating that, in particular recruiting characters who have sword symbols on them, and you can use a certain number of sword symbols to repel ships that have strength equal to or lower than those amount of swords. So there is a way of mitigating that, but you still have to factor in that there's some ships that are going to be more powerful than your sword supply, and there's going to be some ships that are unrepellable. No matter how many swords you have, these ships are not going to go away, and they will cause you to bust. Now, the reason why this game bumped up 30 spots on my list. I thought it was already a great game. 76 for this very small, tiny game is very impressive, but 46 is even more so. And it's because of the expansion. I bought the expansion for this game. There's 2 expansions for this game. I bought the first expansion, and the first expansion adds contracts. And not only does it make it more interesting for multiplayer gameplay, but it adds cooperative play. So you can play cooperatively with your players around the table, and furthermore, you can play this game now solo through the use of that expansion. So again, going back to what I said earlier about my growing appreciation for playing games solo, this game definitely was benefited by that. I like the fact that I could play it solo. I like the fact that I can throw in those contracts to spice things up, to play the game cooperatively, or we could just play it competitively, kind of racing to accomplish those contracts because they give you lots of victory points. My number 46 board game of all time, Port Royal. My number 45 board game of all time was also on the list last year. It actually bumped up 5 spots, but it's still more or less in the same territory, and that is Eldritch Horror, designed by Corey Konieczka and published by Fantasy Flight Games. And this is yet another Cthulhu-themed game from the Arkham Horror File line of games from Fantasy Flight, 2 on this particular list. And I enjoy these games. I find them to be very thematic, very immersive, very evocative experiences every time I get into it. And in this game, basically, you're taking on a role of a group of investigators, or you can play the game solo. Even when I play solo, I still control multiple characters. That's just the way I prefer to go at it. And basically, you're trying to fight different monsters and close different gates before the Ancient One or the Elder One penetrates through the fabric of reality and crosses over into our universe and devours us all. And there's so many really cool things that are going on. You're recruiting allies, and you're purchasing items and weapons, and you're learning spells, and you're gaining different conditions like paranoia and amnesia. You're being blessed and you're being cursed, and all these things affect your success at different skill checks, because that's basically what this game is. Lots of different skill checks. Players or their characters, their investigators, have 4 different main stats, and each of those stats govern different areas of gameplay, thematically speaking, and you go on these different encounters, and quite often they will be resolved through the rolling of some dice in order to see if you pass a skill check. And your stat for a character in a particular attribute, that is how much dice they roll, and you need to roll at least a 5 or a 6 in order for it to be considered a success. And combat is handled the same way. Really cool, a hard game to win, but it really puts you in that mood of the world is coming to an end and you really got to stop these big bad monsters with everything you can. And I think one of the reasons why it climbed up slightly on my list, again, is because of my appreciation for solo play and the fact that I've been playing this game solo a lot more. I was only playing it as a group game with other people before, and now as I'm playing it solo as well, I'm enjoying it on another level. I'm able to immerse myself, take the pace that I want to take. I'm able to get more into the different flavor text and the different narrative text on all the different cards. So again, that's helped it to bump up on the list. My number 45 board game of all time, Eldritch Horror. And now we move on to my number 44. And my number 44 is quite the conundrum because this game was ranked number 56 on my list last year. And I did not play it all year last year. And yet it's bumped up 12 spots, number 44. As I'm comparing it to other games, my feelings for it are so powerful that I ignore the fact that I didn't play it at all. Or perhaps the fact that I didn't play it at all maybe makes me be delusional about its greatness. My number 44 game of all time is Tower of Babel by Reiner Knizia. And people are going to be like, what? What is this game? I never heard of it before. Tower of Babel is a very obscure game, perhaps the most obscure game in my entire top 100. This game is not a very good looking game. If you look at the board, it's one of the ugliest boards out there. No offense to whoever made the board. The images all represent different structures, different wonders from antiquity, and they kind of all blend into one another, so you can't even tell them apart. So along with the ancient 7 wonders of the world, they actually add the Tower of Babel as an additional wonder. And what's interesting about this game is that players are all kind of, it's like a semi-cooperative game. Players are trying to build all these different wonders, and they will all be built. And players are contributing different resources in the form of cards to contributing this towards the building of all these different ancient structures. Now, players, the active player, will offer up an opportunity for all the players around the table to contribute their resources from their hand of cards towards the building of that structure on their turn. And every player is going to make an offer as to how many resources they're going to offer. And the active player is going to choose to take one of those players' offer. Now, if you take a player's offer, that player is going to be benefited by placing some of their meeples onto that structure for an area majority. There's an area majority taking place. However, the player who's the active player who also contributed partially towards the building of that structure, they're going to also place their meeples on that area, contributing towards the area majority, but they're also going to take a resource token. There's 3 resource tokens on each of the different locations, each of the different structures, because each of the structures are built in 3 parts, in 3 different separate occasions. And you're going to grab these resource tokens, and those resource tokens are also going to score you victory points at the end of the game as a set collection. Once you get to a certain amount of resource tokens from a given type of resource, you will be scoring lots of points for them at the end of the game. Now, what's interesting about this game is, first of all, every player whose offer you turn down, they're going to get a consolation prize. They're going to score points equal to the amount of resources they offered you and that you denied or you turned down. Not only that, but as you complete different structures, and again, there's 8 different wonders that are being built, there's a track along the board that goes down, and with each subsequent structure, each subsequent wonder, the amount of points that the person who has the majority and the secondary in those areas is going to score, that's going to increase. So you want to time the completion of your structure that you're working on, especially the ones that you have the majority or the secondary on. You want to time them correctly, because if you can make it so that another structure is completed right before that one, then you will score a few more points because of the timing of it all. Really cool, really neat. I like the semi-collaborative feel. I like the wheeling and dealing, negotiating aspect that takes place as all the players are offering you their resources. And I love the calculations that you're trying to map out as much as possible which locations you want to vie for, which ones are reasonable and realistic according to your hand of resource cards. And again, timing when you want to close the deal so you can score as much points as possible and maximize that victory point total. My number 44 board game of all time, Tower of Babel. And now we move on to my number 43, another Reiner Knizia game. This game 44 was Reiner Knizia, Tower of Babel. And this game was ranked number 58 on my list. So just like Tower of Babel, more or less the same section, just it's gone up. Unlike Tower of Babel, I played this game a good amount of times last year, so I do know why it's bumped up. And that's Hollywood Golden Age. And this game is just, it's got to be Reiner Knizia's most thematic game. Reiner Knizia is notorious for his lack of theming in games, but this feels like I'm a Hollywood producer going around town in Hollywood and trying to recruit different directors and actors and seamstresses and cameramen and all these different moving parts that are necessary in order to create a film. And this is the golden age, so all the characters and the directors, they're based on the golden age of Hollywood, the 40s and 50s. But that's fun too. It's kind of like historic. It's like a historian or maybe a person who likes classic older films can really get into this theme. And again, just managing all of that, getting all the necessary pieces for your film, and then trying to score awards for them during the game and at the end of the round for best film in a particular genre, maybe even for the worst film, for the best directors, for the best film currently, for the first person to create a film in a particular genre. All of these will gain you awards. Now, this is an auction bidding game with a really cool auction system where you have a closed economy. You know how much money is in the game. From the beginning of the game, collectively among all the players, there is no bank, so there will not be an ever-flowing supply of money coming in. So when players win an auction, instead of paying that money to the bank, they actually are going to pay it to the players who lost the auction. So that kind of balances the game because a player will not be able to win too many consecutive auctions because eventually they'll run dry, they'll have no more money, and their opponents will be quite wealthy. So that's something to factor in. And the reverse is true too. If you lose lots of auctions, you're gaining money, and ultimately you know that you're going to win a handful of those. You just have to wait and time it correctly. Really cool, really neat. I like the theme. My number 43 board game of all time, Hollywood Golden Age. And now we move on to my number 42. And this game has dropped down a bit. This game was ranked number 18 on my list last year. I believe it was in my top 10 2 years ago. And now it's down to number 42. And that is At the Gates of Loyang, designed by Uwe Rosenberg, and this iteration here published by Tasty Minstrel Games. And this game here, I love the Oriental theme. I love the engine building process that takes place in this game. And I love the solo variant that comes with this game. But I have to be honest, the solo variant leaves me a little dry because it has a cool little AI that interferes with your card drafting. Card drafting is a big part of this game. But at the same time, the AI cannot win the game. You're competing against yourself, and it's a beat your own high score type of solo game. And those games, the more I play them, the more tired I get. Maybe I don't find myself to be very much competition to myself, right? It's not like I'm the greatest player of all time. So there is that. I haven't played it competitively in a while, and that might also affect it. I think this game plays best at 2 players. It is one of Uwe Rosenberg's better solo games. I've heard Feast of Odin is pretty good solo. I haven't tried it. But this game here, again, the theme is really cool. I like the going to market and getting all these different veggies and planting them on your fields and harvesting them and then meeting the demands. This is a contract fulfillment game where you're trying to meet the demands of different customers, and you have casual customers who are a little bit more easygoing but pay you some more money, and you have your regular customers who pay you a little bit less but pay you multiple times because they have expectation from you. They want you to fulfill 4 different separate orders on them. But if you go too long in between different orders, then you're going to have to pay a penalty, and that penalty comes in the form of money, and money is very important if you want to win the game. Really cool game. It's dropped down. It probably will continue to drop down, but for now it's hanging tight at number 42 at the Gates of Loyang. And now we move on to my number 41, the last game on this list. And this game here was ranked number 42 last year. So it's holding steady. But what's interesting is, just like Tower of Babel, I did not play this game in the entire year last year. So my fond memories of the game must really be keeping it in this place. And that is San Juan by Andreas Seyfarth. And this is the spin-off or sequel or card version of Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico did make it to my top 100. It was on my list a few sections ago. As a matter of fact, last time it was number 52. So it's just about an 11 spot difference. And San Juan, I like it so much more than Puerto Rico, though. Even though I didn't play it last year, I like the way the cards work. I like the fact that it keeps the variable phase order from Puerto Rico, but makes it a very cool, intricate, multi-purpose card game where your cards not only serve as your buildings that you're using to build your section of San Juan. This is a city building game indeed. But your cards also serve as resources that your production buildings produce, and they also serve as money that you're using to pay for your building cards as you place them down. Really cool. You got to make a decision as to which cards you're going to use for what, because you might have some awesome cards that you might, in theory, want to build all of them. However, some of them are going to have to pay the price in order to build or other buildings that will be your priority. Now, the really cool thing about this game is that each of these buildings really give you neat benefits and powers going forward. So you're feeling so much more efficient, so much more production as the game goes on. By the time you make it to the end of the game, you really have this really nice engine built, and you kind of want the game to keep on going, but unfortunately, as soon as 12 cards are built in your table area, in your tableau, that triggers the end of the game, and you're like, oh shucks. But you're hoping that you have the most victory points in your tableau in order to win the game. This game can play anywhere from 2 to 4 players. I like it just fine with 2 players. I do have the expansion that's included in this box here, which I had to try out and see what it does as far as my liking of the game, and I gotta get this game to the table in 2022. I cannot go 2 years in a row without playing a game that's ranked so highly on my list, or otherwise it definitely is going to have to suffer and be bumped down. But for now, it's still my number 41 board game of all time, San Juan. And that's it for today's list, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here on Higher at Board Games. Please comment down below and tell me what you think about this set of 10 games. And don't you miss it. Next time, I'll be covering games number 40 through 31. All right, this is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.